Hi, guys. It's finally Sunday and Cell took over. Gosh. All right. So, before I begin, I need to clarify one thing. You will probably leave here tonight with more questions than answers. And the reason for that is because I do not have time to answer every single question that I raise, which is why it's called a series. And I have to give you a reason to come back. Okay? So, I promise you by the third week I'll have all the questions that I raise answered, and if I don't, just ask. Okay. Now, the intro saved me about 5 minutes worth of, the video saved me about 5 minutes worth of introduction. So, let's just jump right in. Now we understand contracts. Contracts is all over our lives. We do a lot of contracts. We know a lot of contracts. Everybody here has at least 5 contracts if you really think about it. Back in the day, especially in the Middle East, actually all over the world to be honest, they used something different. They used something called a covenant. And to be honest with you, covenants and contracts are very similar, which is why we can mistake the two. A lot of people have this misunderstanding that covenants are just this, super duper awesome, more powerful thing than a contract, and a contract is just a scam. But it's not true. There are very many different types of covenants, and the majority of covenants are very, very similar to contracts. But there are some covenants that look nothing like a contract. So let's begin by what we know and what we have experienced, which is contracts. Contracts are bilateral. 2 people have to come to an agreement. 2 people have to come together and say, let's agree on this. Let's make a deal. Contracts are also conditional. There are certain conditions that you have to meet, and you have 2 groups of people who come together and say, person A says, this is what I promised to do. Person B says, this is what I promised to do. And if person A decides, I don't want to do this anymore, then person B has no obligation to continue on doing what he promised to do. Right? The third thing is contracts are negotiable. You get together and you say, I'll throw this in if you promise to do this. Okay? With certain covenants, you don't get that privilege. There's no negotiations. And finally, contracts are revocable. When a contract is finished, when it's accomplished its purpose, it's no longer in effect. It's kind of like what Jim Bushi shared about 2 weeks ago, I think. 2 or 3 weeks ago, when he talks about how stupid it would be to keep paying your mortgage when you've paid it off. All right, you go to the bank and you give them the $1,200, and you're like, here it is, and they look at you and say, but sir, you've paid your mortgage off. The contract is null and void. What are you doing? Right? Some covenants, they never end. They can never be revoked. I can't talk about every single covenant, because if I do, then I'd be talking for the next 2 years. But I want to talk about the monster of all covenants. I want to talk about the covenant of covenants. I want to talk about the most sacred, the most powerful, the most binding covenant there ever has been and there ever will be. The one covenant that is in existence in every ancient culture, amongst every ancient people groups, all over the world. And that covenant is called blood covenant, or covenanting in blood, or blood friendship, or blood brotherhood. So let's define blood covenant. First of all, a blood covenant is unilateral. It's one directional. It is you as an individual saying, I vow to do this. It's not bilateral. You don't need the other person to say, well, I vow to do that. A blood covenant is irrevocable. You can't say, I thought about it, and it was a bad day when I did that. I need to back out. I changed my mind. You can't do that. It's impossible. And a blood covenant is indissoluble. You never satisfy the terms of the blood covenant to a point where there's no need for it anymore. It never goes away. The only way you get out of a blood covenant is if you die. And in some cases, that doesn't even work because it continues on to other generations. That's the power of the blood covenant. What gives it that power? Why is it that way? Why did I say it's unilateral, it's irrevocable, it's indissoluble, and unconditional? What makes it so? Blood. Blood makes it so. You know, today it's Halloween night, is it? 31st? Yeah. It's Halloween night. It's a scary night. Modern day people look at blood and they get scared. Most people, okay? Other than medical professionals, of course, because we'd have problems. They'd get scared. They'd say, gross. You look at blood and you go, ew. I bet you some people here are kind of starting to get a little queasy because I've mentioned blood way too many times already. And you probably should go get a bag because we're going to be talking about blood a lot tonight. All right? But back then, guys, when you mentioned the word blood, you know what you were saying? You're saying life. They believed that blood is the source of life. It's the essence of life. It is life itself. Blood is precious and valuable and sacred to all kinds of people groups. In fact, in Israel, they considered blood so sacred that God in Leviticus said, the life of the being is in the blood, so I want you to use that blood as sacrifices to me, but don't you dare ingest it, don't you dare touch it. That's just to me. But it's interesting because in every other people groups, they believed the same thing. They believed the life is in the blood, but that's exactly why I need to drink the thing. That's exactly why I need some of it inside of me. I need that life in me. I want that life. Whatever that life represents, I want it. It's very interesting. Only the Hebrew people were the ones who said, don't touch blood. And I know you're thinking, some of you with Indian descent are thinking, well, what about India? They don't even eat meat and stuff. But back in the day, they actually used to. And there are certain Indian ceremonies where they would sacrifice animals and they would consume the meat raw and bloody. And they would do it amongst all the sects and all the classes. And the untouchables would be in the same room with the whatever other sect, and they would all share and eat from the same sacrifice. Pretty amazing. Now, what I'd like to do is kind of go through how people did this thing called a blood covenant. And because I'm the one speaking, and because I'm from the Middle East, I decided to choose the Middle Eastern way of doing a blood covenant. Are you with me so far? Am I going too fast? Okay, good, because I need to go faster. So two Middle Easterners would come together, and this is, guys, you need to understand, did I clarify this enough? Covenanting is not a biblical idea only. It existed in every culture all over the world before the Bible was written. Think about it. The first time God mentioned, I will want to make a covenant with you, was to Abraham. And when actually Noah, to be honest. But anyway, he came to Abraham and said, I want to make a covenant with you. Abraham didn't go, well, that sounds great. What's a covenant? He knew what a covenant was. He knew what's at stake. People did it all the time. Blood covenant as well. Okay? So it is not solely a biblical idea. You need to understand that because it's very important for the future. About 30 minutes. Okay. Now, the first thing they would do when two men would come together to make a blood covenant is they would make a unilateral agreement before God. This is very, very important because the idea is if I come to make a covenant with Sel, I am not making the covenant with Sel. Very important. I'm making the covenant to God towards Sel. In other words, when I'm making the covenant, I'm making my vow and my promises to my God, my deity, whoever that may be, and it's directed towards Sel. That's what gives it the power. That's what makes it more binding. Because if it's just to Sel, well, Sel's another human being. But my vow is to my God. Whether it's, big G God or small G God. Okay? So you'd make that vow, and then you'd express the terms. Now, because it's your life, because blood is the life, the terms are everything. Nothing is excluded. I'm giving my life to Sel. And Sel is giving his life to me. And we're saying we are living for each other for the rest of our lives. So I can't say, Sel, man, you're my blood brother. You got everything I have except for the motorcycle. Don't touch my motorcycle. I can't do that. It cannot be excluded. All right? Then what we'd do after that is we'd exchange gifts. We'd exchange gifts to show the seriousness of our commitment. One of the things that we'd do is we'd exchange our outermost layer of clothing, our coats, our jackets. Why? Well, back in the day, the jacket signified what tribe you were from. It signified what ranking you had in that tribe and what your authority was within that tribe. It's basically the same idea as in the military. You know, the decorated military guys, the generals and the colonels and stuff, they wear the badge, the stars, the badges, those kinds of things. Where did it come from? It came from old days when they would wear those coats and that say, I'm from the tribe of thus and so, I have this kind of ranking, and don't touch me because, I'm wearing this jacket. You're taking that jacket off and you're giving it to your brother and you're saying, you're me now. You have my authority. You have my power. You have my standing in my people. The second thing they would do is they would give their weapon and their weapon belt. And they would literally take off their weapon belt and they would throw it at the feet of the other person, signifying two very, very important things. The first one is clear. My entire military might, my strength, my body will be used to aid you against your enemies. And all of your enemies are now my enemies. But the second crazy thing it says is this. If you decide to come against me, if you decide to use my weapons and my army to attack me, to destroy me, I stand defenseless before you. Go ahead. Kill me. I'm not going to retaliate. I'm not going to defend myself. That's how they did it. That's the craziness it takes. The third thing they would give is their names. My last name is Toumayants. Sel's last name is Edor. If Sel and I were to be blood brothers, my last name from that day forth would be known as Tumador, and his last name would be known as Edoyants. What's the big deal? It's basically having power of attorney. What it means is, I now have power of attorney over all of your possessions, all of your lands, all of your sheep, all of your cows, all of your camels, all of your cattle. I can walk into your tent, take whatever the heck it is I want. I can walk into your barn, get whatever animal I want. I can even walk into your own house. And yes, ladies, I'm sorry, that's just how it was. I could take your wife. I know, it's crazy, isn't it? But I could even take your kids. I could say, it's harvest. I got way more land than you. I need some hands. Could you please give me your son for the next 2 weeks? Okay? That's what the name did. You had access and authority to everything that they had through the name. The last gift, and pretty much the most important gift, is the blood. This is where it gets a little gross. Sorry. What you would do if you were non-Jewish, you would literally cut your arm with a knife. And you would either, depending on the culture that you belong to, you would either let your friend suck your blood. Yes, actually eat the blood. Or you'd mix it together. You'd cut the palms of your hands, you'd hold